Hi, and welcome back to the Naples Commission. I'm your host, Sean Shahkarami, and I am super excited to be joined here today with our featured speaker, Ms. Jill Mesner. She's the founder, owner, and operator of JM Creative Consulting right here in Naples, Southwest Florida. And before we just jump right into that, do me a quick favor, and if you're a fan of this channel, hit the subscribe button for more content like this where we talk with local business owners on insightful topics of interest to operators and people here in Southwest Florida, as well as wealth principles to build, protect, and pass down wealth. Jill, why don't you just take a moment and introduce yourself?
Well, like you said, my name is Jill Mesner. I am the owner and operator and founder of JM Creative Consulting. I'm a business growth consultant here in Southwest Florida. I'm a native of Southwest Florida, so I'm got a very unique perspective on the cycles, the seasons, and really how businesses, especially contractors, nonprofits, startups, need to navigate through that and be set up for success via systems, processes. Sometimes it boils down to having emails and calendars set up, if you could believe that, all the way to complete role realignment, job descriptions of a team. So it can span the gamut.
So there's a lot to dig in there. I know first and foremost how important systems, processes, and people are to businesses, especially businesses that hit certain stages of growth. And if the desire is to scale, those things are paramount of importance. So I do want to circle back to that, but you said something really interesting that has come up several times over the past few weeks in prior interviews about cycles and seasonality. Some recent guests have said that these past couple seasons here have been a little bit lighter than normal. Is that something that you've noticed? And do you have any specific insights as to why you think that might be the current trend?
Well, for me, when I say seasonal, because I work with a lot of contractors in construction, I spent 30 years in construction industry myself. And during the rainy season, it's real tough sledding out there, especially for ground contractors, roofers. Just getting the exterior part of the buildings done is very challenging. So for me, sometimes that's the slower time to be able to work with the businesses. And then, of course, during season, true season for us, when the roads are hard to navigate, that's when things really pick up. People come down, they want renovations done, they want to open new businesses. So that's really where I want to get businesses closed out from my agreement. If it's 6 months, I want to try to be wrapped up. Not that I don't do work during the season, but for larger companies, maybe nonprofits that I also work with during season, that's when they get a lot of their funding. And so I want them to be set up. I've been working with a nonprofit to get their fundraising committee set up and get fundraisers, their bigger ones, set up and ready to go for when season comes back around. They didn't have a committee before. So getting that all in line and ready to, soar, hopefully during the season, is really important. And I know depending on other businesses, the season brings more spending, right? Maybe restaurants or cafes, that kind of stuff. So it's a different type of seasonality when I look at it and talk about it.
Yeah, I completely understand. So, in terms of your season, if I'm hearing you correctly, where your expertise and experience really comes into play is maybe during the off season to help businesses prepare and scale up for the what we call the snowbird season.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And I really encourage them to do that, especially if it's a long-term agreement, 6 to 9 months. That's obviously going to span through the summer, fall. But if we're taking those steps, they're going to see the benefit and be able to implement it, but at the same time, understand the urgency, right? So if they start to see those benefits early on, they're going to be more eager, I've seen, to keep that in place, specifically with the nonprofit. they've been taking these steps, because the first part of our agreements is the dirty work, right? I get in there with them and I roll up my sleeves and shake the tree and, see what falls out and stays in, right? And that's where the real magic happens. And then we start to implement the true solutions that I found are really going to make a difference and help them scale. Because pretty much all of them want to scale, but not everybody wants to scale up, right? Some of them want to scale out. And I think there's a significant difference. If you want to scale up and you want to grow up, get millions and millions of revenue. And then there's the other ones that want to grow out. They want to grow their reach, be more profitable, not necessarily expand, quadruple their employees. They want to be profitable. None of us go into business as entrepreneurs to break even all the time, right? We could go back to our jobs and make six figures and not have to worry about it and have 401k and insurance. So, I really tried to ask those questions up front. What is your primary aim in your life? What personal goal do you want to achieve by fixing and implementing these solutions? And I had a finished carpentry contractor say, "Well, I want to be able to go on vacation back home to Mexico and not have to be on my phone all the time." And that's what we, put up on the whiteboard. And, that's the goal. And I just wrapped up my agreement with him, and he's not waiting until the end of the year. He's actually getting ready to go to Mexico in a week. Right. Mm-hmm. So far, obviously, before the end of the year. And I'm just really excited for him that him and his wife were able to do that. That right there is well worth it. Yeah. Aside from he's growing his contractor base and has time with his family and has time to invest in the proper equipment and materials that he just didn't have time to do before.
So what would you say in your experience is, I'm glad that you brought up that question. It's an important question for, I think, not even just all business owners to answer, but just people in general, right? We're all working. Most everyone's working. And I think a lot of times people get out of alignment when they don't know what the purpose of their work is. What's the goal? What's the aim? Knowing that you kind of specialize in the operations and the process perspective, what's the number one misalignment that you find typically between a business owner's goal and how their processes and operations are actually set up?
Quite honestly, it's financial accounting, bookkeeping, records. They're spinning their wheels. They're running around crazy, working, and they're making money. The money's coming in and they can buy a vehicle and they can take the family on vacation, but they're not seeing the ability to grow. They're getting jobs, but then they still look at the books and they're like, well, I can't hire anybody. And, I've talked to potential clients during my needs assessment, which is what I do before we go to contract. It's a paid service, but I do it like a deep dive before we move on. And I'll ask them questions like that, who's doing this? And maybe mom's in the back doing the books. Maybe mom needs a QuickBooks class, or maybe you need a quarterly bookkeeper. And none of those things were happening, right? And so now they're left wondering why. And it's usually because they don't know what their profit margins are. And that just boggles my mind when I hear that, right? And as any contractor, and nonprofits are a little different in that they don't have profit, but they do need to be, very mindful of how they spend. That's why they have a board. But anyhow, the whole profit margin thing just drives me crazy. And I'm like, well, how are you tracking whether that job, you mismanaged the estimate, or you let the client get away with adding stuff and not catching it and charging for it? Did your guys not show up for 2 days in a row? And how did you handle that HR potential issue? Did you keep them on? Are they going to continue to do that and hurt your revenue stream? So it's those kinds of questions about bookkeeping and accounting. And my finished carpentry company, that's the example I'm kind of using. I eventually got down into the nuts and bolts of it. And I don't claim to be an accountant or a bookkeeper. I've got an entire network of resources that I use to connect my clients with. And so I had a accountant bookkeeper. She was bilingual. I referred them to her. They're working, it's magic, he says. And that's another one of the benefits that I provide to my clients. If I'm in there operationally and I hear them say, yeah, I think I need to market better, or I think I need, to learn how to do socials or whatever, I can direct them to an extent. Yes, you should be doing this. This is a great opportunity for your type of company. And then I can also refer them to a smaller marketing company I know, or a larger one, or, PEOs, all of that kind of stuff. And so I offer way more than just operational restructuring, but understanding those other outside spokes that need to be connected with the outer wheel.
So it's super interesting because we're in two completely different lanes. I'm more on the financial side, wealth building of things, tax strategies to some extent, but I come across some of the same pain points and problems in my clients. And so my question for you is, when it comes to the ideas of profit margin, especially in terms of growth and bookkeeping and profit margin maybe being the bottleneck per se, I've found that a lot of operators get to a point where there's a certain level of comfort with where their business has gotten to, and there may be a desire to get to either the next level upward or the next level outward. But typically that next level costs something, and it typically costs letting go of some control and delegating more. And typically, as you're now delegating and leading people, there's a learning curve. And so a lot of business owners I've found that who I work with get really scared very quick because undoubtedly someone's going to make a mistake. There's going to be a complaint. There's going to be a fire drill. Life happens in business. So is it more of a mindset shift that you think these owners have to go through? Or is it truly just understanding the numbers?
Well, depending on if I'm talking about contractors, subcontractors, like the pest control company I'm getting ready to start working with. Some of them have no idea what a P&L is or what the use of a true P&L is. And some of them, they have to have a whole shift. They have to go out on a ledge and trust the process, right? And that's why I have a process like that. First, I do complimentary call or coffee, and then I get them to agree to do a needs assessment. Just let me come in. You're already talking to me. You know something needs to give. You don't know exactly what it is. You know you want to fix it. So let me just come in and take a look. And then I give them a report and I go down I'll go in and interview different employees. I'll ask all kinds of questions. And some of them buy in. Obviously, we go to contract. But like I said before, those first couple of months, you're getting your hands dirty. And that's when I see oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. I didn't know it was going to be like this. And I have 4 to 6 recommendations I put in my report. These are the things that we need to target. And this is kind of how I'm going to do it. I obviously can't go through every detail because I've got to work through it. But I've had to tell them, I need you to trust the process. I need you to trust me. Especially when you got employees. I've had it where the owners, yes. And then a couple of the employees are like, no, or they're afraid I'm coming in to try to get them fired or something, or prove that they aren't doing their jobs. And that's absolutely, obviously not my intent. And my nonprofit is where I went in and found that 2 roles, one woman was being underutilized completely. The other one was being asked to do things she's never done, was never going to succeed at. She was completely set up for failure. And so I convinced the owner, I said, these have to be realigned. You can't do this. Yeah. And they had to cancel a big event, and it was a whole mess. But it happened right as I started with them.
Mm.
So it was perfect. So it varies, you know. And then of course they start to see the numbers, and I pull that out. So this new contract you have, finished carpentry guy, did you calculate, did you put a profit margin on the bottom? A line item? Yep, I sure did, Jill. Yeah, and he had never done that before. So he's using an estimating system, and it's just all of those things. But until that owner starts or stops working in the business and starts working on it, he's never going to have time to step back and do that. And that's where I come in to help them. Let's streamline these things. Let's get rid of the inefficiencies and the stuff, that's holding you back, the pain points. So you have time to go build your business, not chase it around town.
Yes, the age old in the business versus on the business.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that some operators are also operators, so there's going to be some extent where they have to work in the business, and it might be a little bit industry specific, but have you found a sweet spot or a process that kind of helps unlock people of, hey, 60% of your day should be in the business and 40% should be structured on the business? I'm just using made up numbers, but is there a sweet spot that you found that tends to work well?
So it's funny you should ask that. So back to my carpentry guy, he wasn't pre-ordering materials, and so he was talking to me about his crew, and that some of them didn't drive, and so he was picking them up and taking them to the job site and then taking them home. I said, well, how many hours a day do you think you spend doing that? 2 or 3? I was like, And then he was talking about materials. And I said, well, how often are you ordering materials and picking them up? He said, about almost every day. And I was like, well, how many hours do you think you spend doing that? Probably about 2. I said, so more than half of your day is spent doing things you should never be doing. Never. You should not. I mean, unless you have a crew member stuck on the side of the road because his car broke down. I mean, sure, but you should not be anybody's transport. You should be at meetings with new clients, new, contractors you're calling on. And so, as far as percentages, for a contractor of his size, he's about 4 years in, makes money, but like I said, he didn't know how much was profit and all that. So he's at a good spot, but he should be spending probably 65% of his time either going to networking stuff. He actually joined my networking group, which I did not tell him to do, but he did it because now he has time. But going around and trying to get in with new contractors, going to CBIA events, doing all those things to grow his business. And the other 40%, going and checking on his job sites because he still needs to do that. And for that, I think that's a good sweet spot.
So diving just a little deeper, because I think this is super valuable for business owners who tune in. Have you ever experienced where it's difficult for owners to make that transition? And just kind of give you an example, what I've found, what I've seen, curious to see if this resonates with some of your experiences, is typically when someone starts a business, it's because they're a technician, they're a master of their craft. And they typically are passionate to some degree about what they're doing, especially I'd say in the contracting world. I've met a lot of contractors who are very passionate about, hey, I do cabinets because I'm passionate about it and I do them better than everybody else. But when you make that jump from in the business to on the business, like you mentioned, he joined a networking group. Well, networking is a completely different skill set than putting cabinets in. Have you ever seen maybe owners who struggle to make that jump, and how do you help them?
Sure. I try to be there with them because I don't just end the agreement and bye. I try to stay with them, check in on them. And still ask them how I can support. Hey, do you want to, grab another coffee and you talk to me about, how you're doing getting out there? For him specifically, he's a little shy, right? His wife, speaks great English. He speaks English, but he's very nervous, but he has to get up at the networking stuff and talk about who he is and what he does. But I will give him props, like encouragement. You're doing great. Don't worry about it. But it was hard for him. It took almost the entire agreement for him to even go to a luncheon. So I just have to be patient, and I need to stay the course because I know these are the right things for them, or they were my recommendations for a reason, right? But then there's other clients who, no matter what I say, just don't want to have team meetings. They don't, they don't want to, you know, uh, go to networking things with and they're the owners. And okay, all right, that's fine. And then 3 months down the road, now they, hey, I think we should have a team meeting. And I'm like, okay, all right, good. I don't say anything. I let them come to their conclusions at the end of the day, because I'm not there to say you're doing it wrong and I'm going to teach you how to do it right. I got to guide them, and help them implement it. And sometimes my recommendations, we implement them and they have to be tweaked, of course. I mean, they're a group of people. We're all individuals, right? And we all have our own skills, strengths, assets, weaknesses, trying to navigate in the business world. And like you said, we all have our family lives, our personal aims, our goals, and those are important. And for me, and I was just recently reading a book about this, my primary aim in life is not necessarily to be a millionaire. Of course, we would love that, right? I would love that. But I want to be the best grandmother I can possibly be. I'm in my 50s now, and my kids are having kids, and my grandmother adored me, and she worshiped the ground I walk. Well, she's still alive, so she still does. But I want to have the freedom to be with them anytime I want. I want to grow, and I want to have people that work for me here, because a lot of what I can do is remote. Maybe not in the beginning. I get my hands dirty, like I said, but it's getting them to really understand that and to answer those questions.
So what would you say is your sweet spot? So we talked a little bit about some of your industry focus, but it sounds like your skill set's applicable to many different industries. So I wouldn't want to pigeonhole you into any one industry, but who do you enjoy working with the most? Is it, more startup focused? Do you like to see at least 5 or 6 employees? Is it 500,000, $1 million in revenue? Tell me more about like what really wakes you up in the morning.
I'll be honest. When I first started out, I was like, contractors are my sweet spot. 30 years in construction down here in Southwest Florida. But, I also spent a lot of years in the nonprofit world. And I worked for big nonprofits. So I can scale what I know down and help smaller nonprofits that want to scale up. Right. And then I started talking to business brokers, right? So sellers, even buyers that now need to revamp what they just bought, right? That aren't ready, kind of like Ashley, right? Ashley Hum, who you had on. I know her for that reason. And when somebody comes in, I want to sell this, and business brokers like, you're not quite ready. I think you need to do X, Y, and Z operationally and maybe some other things. Why don't you go talk to Jill? Right. So I love those kinds of clients. They are typically more on board, right? Because they're eager to get ready to sell, right? So they have an incentive financially that they can see, right? But I think ultimately, I love about any kind of business, right? Because what I do, it spans across all industries. Like I'm, going to start working with the pest control company, and now I think I'm going to start working with a large Southwest Florida moving company. What I will not touch is medical and restaurant. I have no desire, and I really have no background in that. So I wouldn't be doing myself or them any justice. And I'm smart enough to know that. But I found that I like working with all of them. And it's a challenge, these newer companies. But like I said, I do the needs assessment. I really get into it. And if I ever got into something that I thought was, yeah, I think you need bigger help than this. I think you need full on rehab, right? I can give it a shot, but I might bring in some of my other referral partners to help me with. However, when you mention startups, I've worked with a handyman that was going out on his own. I actually just shared his referral letter with me on my social media today. And he was just starting out. He didn't know A to Z what he needed to do, right? And it's actually a new service I'm going to put together, having worked with him. I'm like, this is an absolute need out there for people that want to start something. They have the idea, they have the background, but they have no idea what the number one thing is before you get out there. And that's to go to Sunbiz, right? You got to find out if the name you want is even available. You can't do anything, or you shouldn't do anything else until that. I did that for him and walked him through, and he's in Orlando. Yeah, and it was just easy. Yeah, I've done it so many times.
So interesting on the business broker stuff. We've kind of talked offline about this. What would you say is the most important, or maybe not, it's always the most important, but the most common pitfall, mistake, or thing you need to resolve to help owners maximize their value so that they can sell their company?
CRM have their customer base locked in. Like past clients, current clients, your pipeline, current up to date. A buyer doesn't want to have to come in and recreate the wheel and find clients or figure out, do you even have repeat clients? That's an important thing. When you have a high percentage of repeat clients, that means you're doing a good job in any business, right? Because that means people want to come back, right? That I feel is number one, in my opinion. The other pitfall is not having a P&L, not having basic accounting information. You don't have to have, an on the payroll CPA or any, to be valuable, but you need to have had some professional, bookkeeper, a good tax accountant. They want to see that, right? And I think those are the two biggest pitfalls. I wouldn't want to go buy a business if I couldn't see that you had a legitimate client base and pipeline, or that you could tell me what your profit margin was last month, right? So,
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think it's interesting that you bring up the CRM. I think a lot of times owners take for granted the CRMs. And I think, at least from what I've seen, I think sometimes business owners, myself included, make things harder on themselves than what has to be. Because you're right, repeat customers are not only a sign that you're doing a good job, but a lack of repeat customers is an important signal, and it's fixable. And the reason I bring up that as a signal and a resolvable issue is because when we think about profit margin, the cost of acquiring a new customer is on average 5 to 10 times more expensive than delivering another service or the same service, depending on the industry, to someone who's already been a customer in the past.
all right. That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think you're the first person to bring up the CRM and its importance on one of these interviews. Is there any other, maybe from a sales and marketing perspective, where you've seen a breakthrough for an owner just by kind of leveraging the data in their CRM that they already had that just was untapped?
Social media. So extracting all those contacts that they have, like the nonprofit. So what they have in there are, because they see dogs and cats, and they're a nonprofit for animals. So they have in their system, well, now, because now they've got everybody in there. They've got donors, they've got past clients, they've got vendors, they got volunteers, they got all of these people now in their database. And now, as I said, you need to go find all of them on Facebook and LinkedIn, because they do a lot of fundraising events and a lot of stuff now that they're able to. You need to go find all of them and start, following their businesses and all that. Because if you're not in front of them, they're not thinking about you, right? And so I think that is how I mean, from my perspective, that's how they should leverage every contact that they have. Really goes across all, industries. You need to go out, find every person that you've come in contact with and go follow them. Go check them out. The hardest thing I've ever had to get anybody to do that doesn't already do it. And if they're already doing it, then we're probably not working on big, heavy duty issues. Is when you meet somebody, if you go to an event and you have cards or you got phone numbers or emails somehow, within 48 hours, you should have sent them a follow up email noting something maybe that you talked about, because you're really listening to them. You're really caring about what they were sharing. Not robotic in a way, but and then connect with them. Whether it's a referral partner, whether it's somebody who wants to donate, somebody that just wants to have coffee, you don't have any idea how it's going to work out. And for me, I know a lot of bigger GCs, contractors that I'm not going to work with, but their brother-in-law could have mentioned to them over the weekend that he wants to start, a painting company. Hey, Joe, by the way, why don't I connect you with my brother-in-law, because he's going to need help. That would never have happened if I wasn't talking to them.
Exactly. And I think you're really uncovering some gold here about how a lot of times in business, the answers are sometimes right underneath our thumb. We're just maybe putting our attention and focus in the wrong place.
Mm-hmm.
And, it also goes back to what you said about your client who was spending 3 to 6 hours a day ordering materials, right? Because if you're focused on ordering materials, you're focused in the business rather than thinking strategically on, hey, how can I use my CRM better? How can I leverage the connections I already have? Because you're right, the person that you're connecting with on Facebook may not be your client, but they may know your client.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that's really powerful. I think it's especially powerful in Naples and Southwest Florida, because it's a very community driven. Naples isn't small by any means, but everybody kind of knows everybody.
Yes. And I know a lot of people that know even more people than me. And that's what I love. I have really good friends that are actually considered connection queens. And one of them actually introduced me to one of my clients, and my finished carpentry client came from one of the big general contractors that had done work for me over the years as an owner's rep. And I went and met with them. I said, hey, you of all people are going to have your finger on the pulse of any subs that need help, or anybody that would need help in the construction industry. And there it went. And it's about having all those connections. So,
Well, Jill, this has been great. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Before we wrap up, is there any kind of last word that you'd like to have?
I would just like to tell any business owners out there that know something is either broken or missing. You've got pain points and bottlenecks. You're not sure what's causing them, but something is. You're running yourself ragged, and from job site to job site or event to event, and you're not delegating because you're worried it's not going to get done. Don't be afraid to reach out to me. Don't be afraid. It's probably not as bad as it seems. Most of the time, it's maybe a handful of things that just need to be realigned, tweaked, removed, added to. It's not that hard. Don't be afraid.
And Jill, thank you so much. If you are a business owner and you'd like to get in touch with Jill, all of her contact information is going to be linked below in the description. And if you found value in this interview, if you find value in this channel, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Jill, thanks so much.
Of course. Thank you.